Picture a woman in a hunter-gatherer camp 50,000 years ago. She is 8 months along. She has felt one set of kicks her entire pregnancy. Normal, expected. Then her body tells her something is wrong. The contractions don't stop after the first cry. There is a second one coming. No midwife with training, no clean cloth boiled in advance, no backup plan, because nobody planned for this. She is about to become the mother of twins. And in her world, that single fact might be the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to her. We don't think about twins this way anymore. Today, twins are a fun fact. A doubled baby shower, 2 car seats instead of 1, a mild scheduling inconvenience for exhausted modern parents who have hospitals, formula, and grandparents on standby. We treat twinning like a coin flip with no real stakes attached. But for almost the entire span of human existence, that coin flip could kill you, kill them, or kill all 3 of you at once. So let's ask the question properly. Could ancient humans actually survive having twins? And what did it cost them when they did? First, the biology, because twinning itself is stranger than people realize. Fraternal twins happen when a woman releases 2 eggs in one cycle instead of 1, each fertilized separately. Identical twins happen when a single fertilized egg splits in 2, very early, for reasons researchers still don't fully understand. Neither version is rare by accident. The rate of natural twinning varies enormously by population and ancestry, and geneticists have found that some of that variation is heritable, passed down specifically through the maternal line. Evolution did not eliminate twinning. It kept the dial turned on even though twin pregnancies are objectively more dangerous, which tells you something important right away. There was enough upside somewhere to keep the trait alive. There's also the matter of size. Twins are, on average, born smaller and earlier than single infants, simply because 2 growing bodies are splitting one set of nutrients inside one uterus built with a single occupant in mind. In a modern hospital, born early and small is manageable. Incubators exist, monitors exist, specialists exist. In a hunter-gatherer camp with no climate control beyond a fire and an animal hide, a smaller, earlier infant facing its first cold night was already starting from behind before anyone had even diagnosed the problem, because nobody had a way to diagnose anything. Identical twins carry an extra hidden risk that nobody in the ancient world could have possibly understood. A significant share of identical twin pregnancies involve a single shared placenta, which means 2 developing infants are drawing blood supply from one network instead of 2. When that shared system becomes imbalanced, one twin can end up receiving too much blood flow and the other too little, a condition modern doctors can now detect and treat with targeted procedures before birth. There was no version of that intervention 50,000 years ago. There wasn't even a way to know it was happening. A pregnancy could be quietly going wrong on the inside for weeks with absolutely no external sign anyone could have read. But the upside came with a brutal entry fee. Twin pregnancies in the ancient world carried dramatically higher maternal mortality. 2 fetuses competing for one set of resources meant more anemia, more exhaustion, more complications during labor, and a much higher chance of a baby arriving in the wrong position with nobody around who had ever seen that handled successfully. A second infant also means a second delivery, sometimes hours after the first, sometimes with the mother already bleeding, already spent, already past the point where her body has anything left to give. There was no clock counting down to intervention. There was just whatever the body could manage on its own twice in a row. Anthropologists studying historical and contemporary forager populations, groups like the Hadza and the Aché, have documented infant mortality rates for twins running far above those for single births. In some recorded cases, more than double, with the second-born twin at consistently higher risk than the first, simply because of how much longer and more exhausting the second stage of labor tends to be. Not because anyone failed to care, because the math of the body simply didn't bend. And the math didn't stop at birth. Here's the part that almost nobody considers. A mother's body was built to nurse one infant at a time on a schedule dictated by walking, foraging, and constant caloric scarcity. 2 infants meant 2 competing demands on the same limited milk supply, delivered by a woman who was also expected to keep moving, keep gathering, keep contributing to the group's survival. Researchers studying breastfeeding demands in pre-industrial and forager societies have found that twin mothers routinely produced less milk per infant than mothers nursing one child, simply because supply could not keep pace with double demand. One infant might get full feeds, the other got whatever was left. In a world with no formula and no substitute, whatever was left was sometimes not enough. There's a physical logistics problem hiding underneath all of this too, and it's one that almost never makes it into the conversation. Mobile foraging groups didn't stay in one place. They walked, often for hours, often carrying everything they owned. A single infant could be carried against the body, close to the skin, close to the heat, close to the milk. 2 infants meant 2 bodies to carry, 2 sets of arms required where the mother only had 2 of her own, which meant someone else in the group needed to step in every single day just to keep both children moving with the camp. Survival wasn't just about birth. It was about logistics repeated daily for years with zero margin for error built in. A single sprained ankle, a single bad season of foraging, a single illness passing through camp at the wrong moment could be the difference between that daily logistics problem being manageable and it becoming impossible. This is where the history gets uncomfortable, and we're not going to soften it, because softening it does a disservice to what these mothers actually faced. In several documented traditional societies, particularly those living under extreme resource scarcity, one twin was sometimes not raised at all. Anthropological and ethnographic records from a range of regions describe this practice occurring specifically in conditions where a mother physically could not sustain 2 infants and still survive herself, or where carrying 2 infants while migrating made the group's survival impossible. This was not cruelty for its own sake. It was a population making an impossible calculation under conditions modern audiences will thankfully never have to face. It is one of the starkest examples in the historical record of biology outrunning what a body and an environment could actually provide. So twins should have just disappeared from the gene pool, right? Too costly, too risky. Evolution should have shut the door. Except it didn't. And here's the twist the channel's been building toward this whole episode. In certain environments, twins were not a liability. They were an asset. In settled agricultural communities with more stable food access, more available caregivers, and crucially, more extended family nearby to help nurse and carry, twin survival rates climbed substantially. Anthropologists call this extra support network alloparenting, meaning care provided by someone other than the biological mother, an aunt, a grandmother, an older sibling. Where alloparenting was strong, the math that nearly killed a forager mother on the move simply didn't apply the same way to a settled mother with 3 relatives living within shouting distance. 2 surviving children from 1 pregnancy meant 2 future contributors to the household, 2 more hands for farming, 2 more chances at carrying the family line forward, all from a single pregnancy's worth of physical risk to the mother. Some researchers studying historical population genetics have proposed that this trade-off, brutal in scarcity, advantageous in abundance, is part of why the twinning trait never disappeared. It was a high-variance bet that occasionally paid out enormously. Geography backs this up in a strange and specific way. Some of the highest natural twinning rates ever recorded belong to populations in parts of West Africa, particularly among the Yoruba people of Nigeria, where certain regions report dramatically elevated rates of fraternal twinning compared to global averages. Researchers have linked part of this to dietary factors, including the consumption of certain yam varieties containing compounds that may influence ovulation. Whatever the precise mechanism, it shows that twinning rates were never fixed. They were responsive, regional, shaped by food, by genetics, by an environment deciding moment to moment whether this particular gamble was survivable. And notably, in many of these same West African societies, twins were not seen as a danger to manage, but as a profound blessing, even spiritually significant, with specific ceremonies and carved figures created to honor them. A striking contrast to the survival math calculations happening in resource-scarce environments elsewhere in the world. That contrast matters because it shows how much of a society's response to twins came down to circumstance rather than instinct. The same biological event, 2 infants from 1 pregnancy, could be treated as a household catastrophe in one environment and a community celebration in another, depending entirely on whether the surrounding social and ecological structure could absorb the extra cost. Historical records from various regions describe twins being given special names, special status, or special caretaking arrangements, specifically because the culture had already built in a way to spread the burden across more than one set of hands. The biology stayed constant across every one of these societies, only the support system changed. And that support system, more than anything else, decided whether twinning ended in celebration or in tragedy. So go back to that woman in the camp, 50,000 years ago, mid-labor, with a second child on the way that nobody expected. What actually happened to her depended almost entirely on circumstance. circumstance, where she lived, how harsh the season was, how many other women were nearby to help nurse, whether her group had just eaten well or was 3 days into a stretch with nothing. Her outcome was not written by fate. It was written by an unforgiving combination of geography and timing, the same combination that decided life and death for nearly every difficult birth in human history before modern medicine existed. Maybe she had a sister camped nearby with a child of her own still nursing, willing to feed a second infant out of pure necessity. Maybe she didn't, and the calculation that followed was the hardest one a person can be asked to make. We don't get to know her specific outcome. We only get to know the range of outcomes her circumstances made possible, and that range was far wider and far harsher than anything a twin pregnancy implies today. And that's really the point underneath all of this. We look at twins today as a charming coincidence, a fun bit of trivia at a dinner party. But twinning is one of the clearest windows we have into how thin the margin used to be between a body doing something biologically possible and a body actually surviving the consequences of it. Every set of twins born today, in a hospital with formula on the shelf and an incubator down the hall if anything goes wrong, is quietly inheriting a gamble that used to be one of the most dangerous bets a human body could make. The biology hasn't changed. The eggs still split or release the same way they always have. The uterus is still built, fundamentally, for one occupant at a time. Only the stakes have changed, because we finally built a world capable of absorbing the cost that biology was always quietly asking someone to pay. There's one more layer to this that brings the whole thing full circle. Twin birth rates have actually been climbing in many developed countries over the last several decades, not because human biology suddenly shifted, but because of two very modern factors. Fertility treatments, particularly those involving hormonal stimulation or the transfer of multiple embryos, dramatically increase the odds of a multiple pregnancy. And rising maternal age at first pregnancy, which is itself associated with a higher natural rate of releasing more than one egg per cycle, has pushed the numbers up further on its own. In other words, the same biological mechanism that once made twins a life-threatening gamble in a forager camp is now, in some cases, being deliberately invited into existence by people with every modern safeguard available to manage it. The risk calculus that decided life or death 50,000 years ago has been almost completely rewritten, not because the risk disappeared, but because we built enough of a safety net underneath it to absorb the fall. And maybe that's worth sitting with the next time someone mentions, almost casually, that they're having twins.